When we think about what causes terrorism, our minds usually jump to big, complex things, right? Geopolitics, ideology, strategy. But what if the real root isn't found in any of that? What if it's found in something much more raw, much more human? Today, we're going to explore how a single, powerful emotion can spark a revolution, and how understanding the human heart might just be the key to understanding global conflict. So picture this: Mohamed Bouazizi, a young guy in Tunisia just trying to make a living selling fruit from a cart. And one day, corrupt officials not only take his livelihood, they strip him of his dignity right there in public. That single, searing act of humiliation, it didn't just end his life. It unleashed a wave of fury that literally toppled governments across an entire continent. It's such a powerful reminder that massive political events can be born from the most personal, gut-wrenching pain. We're so often trained to see terrorism as a kind of chess match, a series of cold, calculated moves made by rational people. But what if we've got it all wrong? What if it's not a game of logic at all? What if, at its very core, it's a primal scream, a reaction born not of strategy, but of pure, unfiltered feeling? Okay, so before we can really dig into that idea, we've got to clear the air a little. Let's take a hard look at the usual suspects, the explanations we hear all the time, and see if they actually hold up. So, what do you think drives someone to extremism? The story we're always sold is pretty simple, right? It's poverty, or it's a lack of education. But here's the thing. The research tells a totally different story. There's a really weak link between poverty and terrorism, and in a lot of cases, it's actually the educated and the middle class who are drawn to this kind of violence. So yeah, the simple answers, they just don't cut it. So if those easy answers are wrong, what's the alternative? Well, for years, many experts have treated terrorism like it's a business decision, focusing on costs, benefits, and deterrence. They build these coldly rational models. But that whole approach leaves out the one thing you can't ever put on a spreadsheet: raw human emotion. And this is where we get to the heart of the matter. Beyond all the numbers and the strategies, there's this hidden force at play. An emotional trigger so powerful it can change the course of history. That force has a name: humiliated fury. And listen, we're not just talking about being angry or upset. This is something much deeper, much more corrosive. It's that specific burning rage you feel when you're not just wronged, but you're made to feel worthless, powerless. It's the feeling of being completely crushed under the boot of injustice. The nuclear bomb of emotions. Just let that sink in for a second. That's how one scholar described it. It's an emotion so uniquely destructive, it can literally shatter a person's sense of self and their connection to the world around them. It's a feeling that just demands an outlet. And way too often, that outlet is violence. Now, humiliated fury might be the spark, but for a real explosion, it needs fuel. And that fuel is a nasty cocktail of other feelings: a sense of moral outrage, a burning contempt for the group you see as your oppressor, and this cold, hard hopelessness that comes from believing there is no other way out. When all those things mix together, you get a perfect storm for radicalization. So, okay, how does this emotional firestorm actually turn into real-world violence? Well, there's a powerful psychological theory that helps us connect the dots. It's called general strain theory, and it gives us a kind of roadmap from personal pain to political violence. The core idea is actually pretty simple. When people or whole communities are pushed to their breaking point by intense, long-term stress, what the theory calls strain, they experience this huge surge of negative emotions. And those emotions create this overwhelming, desperate need to do something, anything, to fix the problem. And sometimes that something is violent. You can almost think of it like a tragedy in 3 acts. Act 1, a whole community is put under some kind of unbearable pressure, maybe a foreign occupation or systemic discrimination or state-sanctioned violence. Act 2, that pressure cooker of suffering explodes into a whirlwind of collective anger, frustration, and humiliation. And then Act 3. For some, the only way they feel they can release that pressure is to strike back, to try and right the wrongs through violence. But here's the thing: not all suffering leads to violence. The theory shows us that the danger gets really high when 3 specific things are true. 1, the pain is just off the charts. We're talking death, losing your home. 2, it's seen as deeply unjust. And 3, it's being caused by some more powerful other. When those 3 forces collide, they can create a vortex of rage that feels impossible to escape. And this isn't just theory. I mean, listen to this quote from a former member of the Tamil Tigers. The military bombed his village. That's the collective strain. He was angry. That's the emotional response. And he joined the Tigers. That's the tragic consequence. It's a heartbreaking but crystal clear example of how this process plays out in the real world. But this brings us to the most crucial question of all, doesn't it? If so many people face these horrific circumstances, why do so few, and it is a very small number, actually turn to violence? What's the difference between the person who endures and the person who retaliates? When you look at the data, it's pretty stunning. The vast, vast majority of people who suffer find other ways to cope. They get into politics, they build communities, some just resign themselves to it. That path to violence, it is the extreme exception, not the rule. The real mystery isn't why people suffer, it's what pushes that tiny fraction over the edge. So what are the warning signs? Well, the risk skyrockets when people feel trapped, like they have no political or social outlets left for their anger. It's a dangerous mix of isolation, desperation, and, crucially, the influence of others who have already decided that extremism is the only answer. So we've peeled back all these layers of myth and misunderstanding, of politics and strategy, and what we found at the very center of it all is something surprisingly simple and something profoundly human. We started this whole conversation in a world of black and white, of rational choices and cold calculations, but we've ended up somewhere totally different. We're in a world of vibrant, chaotic color, a world where the most destructive forces we know are born from the deepest and most personal human emotions. In the end, it really comes down to this. We are never going to understand terrorism by only looking at spreadsheets and battle plans. We have to be willing to get our hands dirty, to wade into the messy, complicated, and incredibly powerful world of human feeling. We have to understand the fury before we can ever hope to understand the fight. And that leaves us with a real challenge. If the seeds of terrorism are planted not in ideology, but in the soil of humiliation and injustice, then how do you fight a war against a feeling? The answer might not lie in bombs and bullets, but in the far more difficult and far more radical act of trying to understand the pain that drives our enemies.